Hello everyone, Mike the Warrior here, and Happy New Year. It's still 2024 by the time I'm recording this, but I want this to already be done, hopefully, so it can be the first video on the channel to start the new year. Anyway, this video is long overdue because it has been quite a while since I did my first top 10. At the time, it didn't really do very well, but my top 10, if I decide to have it on the screen, was about my 10 favorite characters. This time, we're going to be ranking the top 10 battles in the Bakugan Battle Brawlers season. I thought of just moving on to the top 10 characters, but I feel like it would be a better transition if I just covered everything in Battle Brawlers first before I went to New Vestroya. And while I do have the list up, this video isn't really scripted. I have some points that I'm going to bring up, but I'll try to keep the rambling to a minimum just to see how this goes. There's not much of a big ruling. This is honestly just how I feel about these battles that you're going to see, and hopefully I can get my point across in a way where you guys can at least somewhat see where I'm coming from, because nostalgia plays a big part in a lot of these battles. Without further ado, let's get started. Number 10, we have Dan and Runo versus, and I'm probably going to butcher these names, Kanji and Kinta. They were the two twins they fought in episode 6. The reason this episode is on the list is that this was actually my first episode of Bakugan ever, and because I really had no idea what this was, it was my introduction to the show and the world of Bakugan, so because of that, it holds a special place in my heart. This was also the first tag team battle of the franchise, and even though I didn't know the rules going into it, it was pretty simple enough for me to understand what was going on, as they had some pretty unique strategies that they were throwing at us left and right, but they would always explain everything, kind of like how some Yu-Gi-Oh characters will over-explain everything at times. The other reason this makes it on the list, if I had to give anything else, is that this episode is really funny, and the Ferris wheel extreme mountain argument was like the funniest thing to me as a kid. Number 9, we have Shun versus Cabba, or Cabba. They're probably both wrong. This was the end of the extremely one-sided rivalry of these two characters, and to go with what I just said, it's really hard to say that this was an actual battle. These two definitely went head to head, but it's so one-sided in Shun's favor, and it has to make the list for that fact alone. Shun didn't lose a single round, and in OG Bakugan, this is a really huge feat. Not only that, he kinda only used one ability card, Blow Away, which sends one Bakugan from one gate card to another gate card, and he was really toying with him pretty much the entire time. Shun was not taking this guy seriously at all. Another aspect of this battle is what was happening right beforehand. Shun was basically thinking of leaving the Battle Brawlers because Dan and Runo were having a falling out, and Marucho was going through, well, a lot because he had just lost Preyas. And seeing everyone bicker amongst themselves had convinced Shun that he could do this on his own. Conveniently at the same time, Cabba is mad that Billy switched sides, and he's convinced that he doesn't need his teammates. But the real person who's under his skin is Shun, and right before they battle, he starts yapping about Billy, which got Shun thinking, and then the actual battle starts. If I had to think of any excuse for me putting it at number 9, I would have liked if they could have somehow incorporated the idea of having to work together into the battle, so the whole story kind of comes full circle. It still does in a way, but the only real way they could have implemented that is if Alice actually battled, and she wasn't technically doing that yet. But yeah, that's basically everything I have to say about this. Shun's kind of the GOAT. This isn't the last time he's curve stomped someone, but this is probably the most devastating one that we've seen on screen. So with that, let's move on. Number 8, we have probably my favorite battle out of the little last arc where Naga's forces were battling on Earth, and it's Alice, Klaus, and my boy Christopher versus Rabideer. I think I'm saying that one wrong too. Anyway, while I wasn't too fond of her sister Cycloid's battle, or that episode in general, this was a really good follow-up to that, as it was a really great opportunity because this is Alice's first battle with Hydronoid, and I think it was really hard for them to top what they did here. The battle starts off with Christopher and Alice having to team up against her, and it's going well until she hears that her sister has been defeated, so Rabideer I'm positive I'm saying it wrong, basically goes a little berserk and starts taking the battle a lot more seriously. And Hygenoid is basically being frozen throughout the battle, and Alice starts to doubt herself again. Klaus eventually joins in, seemingly taking Alice's place, and tags with Christopher. And I think this was a good move because Klaus was ranked number 2 once upon a time. So seeing Klaus and Cyanoid struggle like this definitely showed off how much of a threat this Bakugan was. So it's not just the fact that, well, Christopher's a kid and Alice isn't Masquerade. And while at first it looks like Klaus might be able to pull this off, him and Christopher are backed into a corner pretty quickly. Eventually, Alice is able to get her confidence up and talks to Hygenoid. Hygenoid tells Alice that he's with her all the way, and Alice then wins the battle in one move. And I think this was just so well done to show the potential that Alice has once she has her confidence in herself. And I did a video some time ago about the Brawlers test, and I had mentioned that that version of Alice that fought Masquerade, while it isn't really the real her, that version of Alice is the most confident we ever seen her, and she's kind of battling circles around Masquerade up to a certain point. And I think Alice could have definitely been that given time if she could get past her constant fear of having to mess up and the pressure of, well, she has to live up to her alter ego Masquerade. And kind of one-shotting and ending the battle like that was a really good way of showing it off. And my bias is showing because, again, my boy Christopher's here. That's one of my favorite episodes in the entire Bakugan series is his debut. Like, I loved the episode as a kid, and when I was rewatching it, I still just get all giddy when I look at this episode. It's so nice seeing how far he came as a character, or at least as a battler, I guess, along with Alice, and though Alice is clearly the highlight here. One last thing, I also really like the art style and the shots that we get in this episode. It looks really sick. Number 7, we have Dan and Marucho versus Jenny and Jewel, or JJ Dolls. This was probably the first 2-part battle that we had, because it was cut up into different episodes. This was when Marucho and Dan basically went up against their idol celebrity crushes, because Masquerade had sent them to try to capture Drago or something. This was Marucho's introduction as a battler, so he had to make a pretty good impression. And even more than that, this was the introduction to Preyas. His attribute change ability makes him stand out even when we get past Battle Brawlers, and they started introducing some other Bakugan who also had it. But Preyas having it first just really helped him stand out, on top of the fact that he's just a delight to have on screen. Everyone seems to love Preyas. He's a huge goofball. Some would even probably compare him to, like, Deadpool, especially in, like, the 2010 era where Deadpool was seemingly everywhere, even at DC. Harley Quinn seemed to be more like a female Deadpool over there. Speaking of which, Preyas also seems to have an Ultraman reference when he comes out, which I think is neat. But focusing on the battle itself, one thing that I like about this is that it shows how Jenny and Jewel are as battlers and how they view their Bakugan. Because they haven't grasped just how serious this situation is, they pull off certain strategies, such as sacrificing their Bakugan to the Doom Dimension with the Water Siege combo that is used quite often. And they don't really seem to care much about the whole sending another person's Bakugan to the Doom Dimension. Most of the other characters come off as really sadistic once they acquire the Doom card, but it just seems that they don't really understand what's really going on, at least to me. And this idea is enforced later on when they make their comeback towards the end of the show and they team up with Marucho again, but we're not necessarily talking about that. I'm just bringing it up to kind of prove my point. Another thing I thought was pretty funny was how they were flirting with Dan and Marucho mid-battle, and specifically there is one instance where it distracts Marucho so he can't warn Dan about what they're trying to do. Overall, this was a really fun battle. And yeah, in the part 1 in that episode, Runo actually kind of goes Super Saiyan, and I thought that was funny as a kid. At number 6, we have Masquerade versus Everyone. Just missed out on making it into the top 5. And this one's kind of cheating. That's why overall I don't want to put it in the top 5. It's a little unfair. But all these battles happen relatively quickly, and it takes up kind of a good chunk of the episode. So what happens is after we're done with, the top 10 little arc where those guys are working for Masquerade and Drago has evolved, Masquerade then decides to basically clean house and go after everyone he's worked with in an attempt to evolve his Hydronoid. Julio, I believe that's his name, gets off screen, and the episode starts off like that, and we're trying to wonder what happened to him, and then we find out it's Masquerade. His next target is Chan, and we have this really great battle with her. After he beats her, he then, I think, goes after Billy, then Cabba, then Klaus. I believe that's the order it is. And if there's one thing that made me love this as a kid, it's every time Masquerade said chaos of darkness. It's just the zoom into his lips. I always thought that was the funniest thing, even though it also sounded really, really cool. And also, this is when we saw most of the interesting plays that Masquerade did that showed why he is number one, like Merge Shield and Oregano Revenge. Like, the Merge Shield ability basically has it, so all the power that your opponent gains goes to you. Basically like Farbros before Farbros existed. And in this rule set where you only get 3 abilities, it can be devastating. This is also one of the main reasons why when it comes to like the mask rivals, I always put Masquerade over Spectra, and I can't stress enough, I hate being the guy that's like, oh, well, the original was the best. But Masquerade getting the opportunity to basically run the gauntlet with his former grunts is a really good idea to just show off how good he is, because compared to Spectra just fought Dan so many times, and he just kept losing in such embarrassing ways at one point that it got a little hard to take him seriously. The highlight out of all these battles, though, was the Klaus battle, because as a kid, I remember this ending differently. Basically, he's down to the 1 Bakugan. No, he's get down to 2 Bakugan, and Klaus is down to 1, Cyranoid. And Cyranoid and Klaus are trying to think of a way to take out Masquerade. Cyranoid's thinking, at least they gotta take out Hydronoid. And she wants to use the self-destruct gate card to basically take them both out and send them to the Doom Dimension. However, Klaus isn't willing to give up his partner, so he's trying to just find a way to stall out and figure out a way for them to win. And they end up getting into a small argument where she ends up using the gate card on her own. However, Masquerade saw through this plan and was able to shut it down. And the thing I don't remember is I don't remember Hydronoid evolving mid-battle. Like, when Dan does it, it's cool, and, some people will say, oh, well, this is some plot armor. But when Masquerade does it, it's just terrifying, because Klaus didn't even beat Laserman. He is really on the back foot, and then his Bakugan evolves. Come on. Anyway, let's get on to the top 5. Just making the top 5, we have Julie versus Daisy. This was the first of the tests that the Battle Brawlers had to do once they entered the Doom Dimension, and honestly, I think it was the best one. I did a whole video where I was ranking the Battle Brawlers test already, but I'm going to try to sum up what I had to say about Julie in this little segment. Basically, this was about Julie having to confront her inferiority that she feels because of her sister Daisy. It also shines a lot of light on Julie and why she acts the way she does, because if you pay attention in the later season, she's a little toned down following this event. The only thing Julie really has at this point that is her thing and not her sister's, since she's always at least implied to be copying her because she wants to be like her big sister, is Bakugan. So at first it looks like Julie just has to prove herself by beating her sister, but in reality that wasn't really what the test was about at all. And the thing that I brought up in my other video was the use of this little laugh track that they did, at least in the dub. A laugh track was used in the beginning of the episode once we see Daisy, and I thought it was a little weird, but I didn't think too much about it. Then later, as this battle goes on, we get a more of an in-depth flashback about Julie trying to be like her sister, and it's revealed that the laugh track isn't actually a laugh track, but it's a haunting memory of a bunch of people laughing at Julie when she tried to act on stage and basically made a mistake. And from someone who has done theater in high school, that fear of just, I hope I don't mess up in front of all these people is a very real thing. And Julie was just a kid, so I can understand why it messed her up like this. However, later in the battle we find out that, at least to Julie, that they weren't necessarily laughing at her because she made a mistake. It was kind of like a they're laughing with her type of thing. But more importantly, the test wasn't supposed to be, oh, she needs to be better than her sister. It's that she needs to have confidence in herself, because there's no reason for her to try to be like Daisy. And this is such a hard-hitting message, especially for a kid show that aired at like 9 o'clock or something on Cartoon Network back in the day. And in terms of spectacle, some of the other battles that I mentioned earlier are probably better, but just the story and the emotion, I had to put it at least in the top 5. Because I do think this is probably Julie's best solo battle. I also really like Hammer Gorham. These next 4 were really, really hard to decide, specifically 4 and 3, as I kept switching over their placements. However, I settled on number 4 being Masquerade versus Dan round 2. And by round 2, I mean specifically their one-on-one. Because technically, the second time they faced off was during the free-for-all with the 2 of them in Shun, but I'm pretty sure you guys know what I mean. As a kid, this seemed like it was going to be the final battle. Dan had just evolved his Drago into Delta Dragonoid, and at the time, because I didn't remember the episode that happened prior, which was Masquerade versus Klaus and the others, I wasn't aware that his Hydronoid had evolved, because, you know, I misremembered it. But we knew how powerful Masquerade was because of the last episode. And I remember the walk to Masquerade got me so pumped. Like, if anyone's a fan of One Piece, right, there's a scene called the Walk to Arlong Park, I believe it's called, and like, I don't really know what else to say besides that scene just hits, and this has the exact same energy as that. Like, all the characters just showing up as they're about to face off. Well, Dan specifically is about to face off against Masquerade. So then when we finally get to him, the battle starts, and from beginning to end, it's just an experience that I wish I could go back and watch the first time again. Like, we have the standard of, okay, they send out their 2 beginner Bakugan. However, Dan's doing surprisingly better than what we would normally expect with how the formula of the Season 1 battles do kind of end up going. And I specifically remember Dan's Saurus against Masquerade's Laserman being like something that really got me pumped as a kid. I'll never forget how my jaw hit the floor, because again, I didn't remember this well, but he says dual Hydronoid stand, and then we see dual Hydronoid for the at the time I thought was the first time. And yeah, like, in my head I was like, they barely beat Hydronoid when it was Dan and Shun. Yeah, Drago evolved, but now Hydronoid evolved. Like, what is he going to be able to do now? And the final round that these 2 had, Delta Dragonoid and Hydronoid, was intense. But what happened, which for years I thought was a little weird, which is one of the reasons why it's number 4, because it's not directly explained. I only know this because I looked it up, and if I'm being honest, while I did have to look it up for my channel, I'm still iffy on if this information is actually true or not. But Drago blows off one of Hydronoid's heads, and this doesn't defeat him. However, Masquerade gets rid of a random ability card, sacrifices some of his little gauge points at the bottom, and then Hydronoid's able to grow his head back. And I said this in my Masquerade video, my Hydronoid video that I alluded to. This, at first seems like some weird shenanigans, but what's actually happening is it's an ability that Hydronoid actually just has built into him. Kind of like Preyas with the attribute energies. When a head is blown off, he can regrow the head by sacrificing an ability card. Once that happens, that ability card cannot be used for the game at all. It doesn't take away one of the ability card the 3 ability card limit, it just kind of shortens an option. And once this happens, the battle is officially a tie. Because of that, they had the opportunity to go in for one final round. And yeah, this seemed like this had to be it. So they go in, and they're on Dan's gate card. Just like, he has a gate card set, they have to battle on Dan's turf. It's his rules. And the gate card is Drago's character card. And for those who don't remember, the character cards basically double the Bakugan's G power. That's what makes them so powerful. And then Drago and Dan use I think it was either the fusion ability or Delta Dragonoid, but they use this combo to try to get Drago as ridiculously high as possible. I think he was at 1,000, and this was really, really rare back in the day. Like, at one point, once we get in the middle of New Vestroya, Bakugan getting up to 1,000 isn't as big of a deal, especially when one character I rag on quite a bit, but Shadow Probe has an ability that literally boosts him up by 1,000, but this was insane at the time, and I was like, well, yeah, Dan got it. He won. And Dan has the line that is edged into my memory ever since I was a wee lad, where he goes, there's no way you can beat us. Masquerade then says, oh no, he can and he will, and he uses his fusion ability, Destruction Impact, and it has the built-in effect that not only does it boost Hydronoid up, it nullifies Dan's gate card. And the character card was one of the main reasons why Dan was able to get the lead the way he was. And the reveal that the gate card got negated broke my heart. Because it means that Dan and Drago lose, and Drago's going to the Doom Dimension. And I want you guys to remember, this was like, I was a kid, I was a lad at the time. So this episode drops, and because reasons, I had to go to school still. Like, the episode drops, and I had to go to school. Me and my brother had to go to school, and everyone's like, wait, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, Dan and Drago lost. And they're like, who? I was so heartbroken, guys. You don't understand. Because not only does Drago go to the Doom Dimension, as you guys probably remember, Dan doesn't want to lose his friend, and jumps into the Doom Dimension with Drago. And that's, like, Drago losing and being sent to the Doom Dimension alone is sad, but the fact that Dan is gone too, I was so devastated. And with everything I just said, I understand if some of you are probably questioning, so how could this be number 4? And, well, the answer is just that I do love the other battles just a bit more, though, and if I had to find one critique, like I said earlier, it's the fact that I didn't really know how did Hydronoid grow his other head back until I looked it up. Like, we see what happens, but I need to know what I just saw. So with that, let's move on to number 3. This might be a controversial pick. As I had said prior, if you really want to, you can switch number 3 and 4. For this one, we have Shun and Julie versus Billy and Cabba. I really like this battle as it's Julie's first time having to deal with the Doom card, and I also believe that this is probably her best battle with Billy at the same time. The Billy-Julie dynamic did get stale for me after this episode, but having her have to fight her friend, and he's essentially killing her Bakugan, was a really good way to have Julie immediately know the gravity of the situation, even though it took her so long to officially fight alongside the rest of the team. And while super annoying, Cabba did have a certain presence, as you could tell he was better than both Billy and Julie. However, he didn't hold a candle to Shun. Having the calm-collected Shun, especially in Season 1, team up with Julie was a really good idea, as these two really don't interact like that. And while this could have just been the dub dialogue doing things, I had always interpreted it as Shun was basically trying to take some of the weight off of Julie so she doesn't have to worry too much about fighting her friend. And I'll never forget the chills I had when Shun told Skyrus it's time to lock and load when he was getting ready to end the game. Everything this battle had presented, I just thought was done extremely well. I understand if some of you thought that Masquerade vs. Dan round 2 is better, especially because there's a lot more emotion going to that one. There is emotion going in to this one as well, as another highlight for me is when Gorom tries to comfort Julie when she's starting to cry because her Bakugan are getting sent to the Doom Dimension. And after that moment, Julie kind of locks in. She does almost lose Gorum due to the quicksand gate card, but Shun was a good teammate and was willing to sacrifice one of his Bakugan to help her out. I just love rewatching this battle, and it is probably one of the ones I've looked at over and over again the most. All right, let's get on to number 2. Number 3, we have Dan, Runo, and Marucho versus Klaus, Julio, and Chen. This was a 2-part battle, and rightfully so, since it's a 3v3. We don't usually get these, so it was bound to be a doozy. This was also the finale to this little arc with the top 10 battlers. In this arc itself, Dan and Runo had a bit of a falling out after Marucho ended up losing Preyas. So while they're arguing nonstop, even more than before, Marucho is, well, I'm gonna just say it, he's kind of depressed because he lost his best friend ever. So when they have this 3v3, the first thing we are really shown is that these three have to work together, but that's easier said than done as they keep bickering over what to do. But the first major bump in how are they going to win this battle is the fact that they somehow revived Preyas from the Doom Dimension. And they're kind of repeatedly using him just to spite Marucho. And these guys just really came off as sadistic with how much they were tormenting this poor kid. And while there is a massive elephant in the room on what happens later on, the first half of this battle is purely dedicated to the fact that Preyas is back and how do they get him back to Marucho? How do they get him away from Klaus? And Runo was the one who ended up stepping up and came with a plan. They just had to find a way to get Klaus to throw Preyas in, which wasn't really that hard since they had no problem just messing with Marucho time and time again. Once they're able to defeat Preyas, thanks to the rapid fire ability, Runo then uses her next turn to activate the Pure Light ability card, and it brings Preyas back into the battle and gives it back to Marucho, ending the first half of this fight. The second half is basically, well, they got Preyas back, but they still have to deal with the enemy. And the rest of the battle is pretty good, but you can tell that something's not entirely right. They start ignoring Tigrera and Preyas, and then it's revealed that they're doing this so they can all gang up on Drago later on and send them to the Doom Dimension. Then they could just pick off the others. And their only real way of winning is they have to combine their power as well. And Runo comes in clutch one final time with the Cut in Savior ability, combining their G power and transferring it into one Bakugan, it being Drago. However, there is a condition. If they lose that battle, then all of them lose. And this extra boost is what gives Drago the power he needs to evolve for the first time into Delta Dragonoid. And while Drago evolving just became a thing that happened until the end of the series, when this happened for the first time, it blew my mind as a kid. And Delta Dragonoid, ironically, is probably in like the top 3 best evolutions. Its design is so sick. I love it. Even with this boost, it doesn't look like they were able to win, as Chan did use one extra ability to try to give them the edge, but Dan also had one last ability, which I have to admit is pretty funny with how much Klaus and the others are laughing, and then Dan just nonchalantly activates his last card, and it gives them the win. The fact that just on being a 3v3 on its own makes this battle unique, and all the emotions that was going into the fact that Preyas is here and they need to get him back was good on its own, but this also being the battle where we get our first evolution is what gives it the number 2 spot. And if this is the number 2 spot, what could possibly be number 1? Well, to me, there was only one option on what could actually beat this battle because it's so good, and that's... I don't think this is going to be a surprise to anyone, but number 1 is Masquerade versus Dan, round 3, their final battle. I'm going to just come out and say it. This battle was perfect. After both parties involved get their Bakugan to evolve for one final time, Masquerade decides it's finally time to go get the Infinity Core from Wyvern and challenges Joe to a rematch. However, Dan who had also evolved his Bakugan one final time, decides that he wants to settle the score with Masquerade himself. And the two meet up, and we get one of the greatest battles of all time. What makes this so special to me is just how unique it is. Again, in old school Bakugan, you had the 3 Bakugan, 3 ability card, 3 gate card limit. And they used that idea really well here because for this battle, specifically Masquerade is in a hurry, so he just wants to end it as fast as possible. So they both use 1 Bakugan each. Obviously, they're using their mains, but the thing is, they keep tying, and if your Bakugan tie, then they just have to start over. However, they're tying so often that even the 3 ability card limit gets used up, so they just have to reload and start over with that as well. This battle is taking a while to finish. And while Dan doesn't seem to mind at all, Masquerade, who starts this battle off with his usually cocky, laid-back demeanor, is getting more and more irritated. And his full breakdown is absolutely hilarious to watch. And I think it goes into Dan's victory, as it seems that Masquerade overlooks something, and Dan eventually capitalizes and is able to win. And after eternity, Dan is finally able to defeat Masquerade for good. And before we talk about the reveal at the end, I also want to go over the fact that this was the battle that had to sell us on Pyrus Ultimate Dragonoid and Alpha Hydronoid. And while Ultimate Dragonoid, in terms of design, isn't nowhere near as impressive as Delta Dragonoid, he's still a really cool Bakugan, but Alpha Hydronoid looks so freaking cool. This doesn't have anything to say about the battle, but if there's one downside to Alpha Hydronoid is he doesn't have the negate gate card ability built into his fusion ability, though Final Demolition is still a really cool name. And because I have my tinfoil hat on, a while ago I did a video about the Brawlers tests, which I've mentioned before, but I have the mindset that Dan and Masquerade's tests technically weren't done. The reason I think this is because while they did evolve their Bakugan, in each of their respective battles, each of the brawlers evolved their Bakugan and the test was still going. And I think Masquerade's test was for him to not only finally have fun with the game of Bakugan, which he did here, but also he had to accept Alice, which is why he doesn't take Dan's offer to join the Battle Brawlers, because that's not his spot. That belongs to Alice. Speaking of, the reveal is so amazing. Like, I remember when I was in school, at this point, a lot of the people were watching Bakugan, and we were trying to figure out who Masquerade was. And some of us were thinking, what if it's Alice? I didn't think it was going to be Alice, even though, if I'm being honest, a lot of signs were kind of pointing to it, because there's that one episode where she disappears from Christopher, and there's Masquerade's test. But the reveal when Alice dropped, the boys in my class were going crazy. Like, did you see Masquerade's Alice? Oh, I'll never forget that day. The reveal is just the final thing to make what was already a fantastic battle even more memorable, because it all happened in like the same episode. Also, this battle was a great wrap up to Masquerade's character. I like his final battle a lot. If this had one more spot, like, the honorable mention would probably be Masquerade and Dan's team up, but I had to narrow it down to 10, and when I really thought about it, this was the choices that I ended up making. But if they had decided to not bring Masquerade back at all after this battle, I would have been completely fine with it. His run was amazing, and this fight's just so freaking good. I don't know what else to say. But with that, I think we're going to call it here. Thank you all for watching. Do you agree with my lists? Probably not. Tell me your lists down below. I really hope that we can have a great year with this channel. If I'm being honest, my goal this time is to try to get to the 1,000 subscribers, but I'm not going to like religiously push that, if that makes sense, because I want to experiment with the channel more than anything. But yeah, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, everyone, and I will see you next time. Peace.